This is the first time I have gone live on TikTok. I've been on TikTok for a bit, talking about my books. I am an author, an independent author. I write literary fiction, which makes it sound like I write Dickens, but I write literary fiction about crazy punks doing crazy punk things. They said, write what you know. And I'm like, all right. So I did. I've been doing TikToks for a little while. I've been promoting my books on social media, also through events. I have been I'm going to be doing the Reno Punk Rock Flea Market next weekend on November 2nd and 3rd. It's going to be in Sparks. It's called the Reno Punk Rock Flea Market, but Sparks, which is right next to Reno. It's not really a flea market. It's really really an art market, and all kinds of alternative and eclectic art. Really great stuff. If you go there, you will definitely see things you want to buy. I'm also going to be doing the Washoe County Authors Fest on November 9th, a week later, the downtown Washoe County Library in downtown Reno. So I'm going to be doing that as well. This is one of my premiere books. It's called What the Hell Ever Happened to Yuri Rozhenko? It is my punk rock road trip novel. It features my character Sky Wright. I've written a lot of stories about Sky. Most of my books are about this character, not all of them. I also have a book featuring my character Preston. He is the main character. This is called A Long, Slow Aftermath. It is a book about someone who he just got out of drug rehab and how he's adjusting to it. I call this I read too much Russian literature when I was a teenager book. That's what I call this one. I'm very proud of this book. It's probably the most dense read. It has a lot of dream sequences in it and things like that. My road trip book, What the Hell Ever Happened to Yuri Rozhenko? It's a road trip book. She goes up and down the West Coast, basically after her life falls apart. And this is the first book that I really started to really promote. It's also the first time I had someone make the cover for me. I always made my own book covers before. This is the very first book I ever wrote. It's called Gutter Folklore. I designed this cover myself. Just got some free images of a pair of boots. And this is basically, it's got an ensemble cast. It is the first appearance of my character Sky Wright, who is my iconic crazy punk character. And it's also the first appearance of Preston. It's basically a bunch of people living in a house in San Francisco. A whole bunch of people. They're all forced to live in the same house because they can't afford their own places. This is a phenomenon that has been going on for literally decades. I mean, they talk about the housing crisis now, but it's been going on in the Bay Area since the 80s. So this is the ensemble cast. There was never supposed to be a main character per se. I was planning on having Preston be the main-ish character. He is in a couple of my books. Let's see. This is like the second book I ever wrote. It's called The Falling Circle. And it's basically a book about what it's like to be poor. And I didn't want to just talk about the hardships of being poor. I wanted to point out how weird it is to be really poor and struggling. For example, just the crazy situations, the bizarre people, and the just absolutely ridiculous places that you would never put up with unless you had to. That's what this book is about. And yeah, The Falling Circle, a lot of people really like it. It's got a lot of punk stuff going on in it. Punk shows, hanging out in squats. If you're not familiar with squats, it's people living in abandoned buildings. Squat cultures was a big thing in Europe. I don't know if it's as big a thing anymore, but it was definitely a thing in the United States. Still kind of is. I'm not as down with the street as I used to be, so I don't know about people living in squats anymore. But like I said, there wasn't supposed to be a main character in this book. And I added this character, Skywright, to basically fill out the cast. She was like the last cast member I created for this book. And she managed to push herself to the front. The description of Skywright was obnoxious punk chick. I've known a lot of people like that. I've known a lot of obnoxious punks in my life. She was never supposed to be a main character, but she just came to life and took over. And the second book to feature Sky is my book, Crash Shadow, A Tale of Two Addicts. This is the longest book I've ever written. It's bloody long. It's well over 200 pages. It's definitely the longest book. It's basically two books. It involves two characters. One who is trying to get clean and sober, and another one who's sinking deeper and deeper into her addiction. So it's like two stories running parallel. It's like the third book I ever wrote. And it's a book I had to write. And I try to make it as realistic as possible. When it comes to the stories about drug addiction, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of stereotypes, there's a lot, I could tell you everything that was wrong with Drugstore Cowboy, which I really enjoyed watching the first time I saw it. But as far as things like drug deals go, as far as I write about addiction and recovery. I am a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and I write about it, so it's not a secret. And you can't really read these books and not think to yourself, I think this guy probably has done drugs before. But yeah, I think if most people saw the way that most drug deals went down, they'd be really disappointed. There's no people waving around guns and swearing at each other and threatening each other, and not usually trying to rip each other off. I have been ripped off on drug deals before, but it's usually just a bunch of guys hanging out, drinking beer, maybe talking about cars or something. It's pretty boring. Yeah, and kind of silly. So, like I said, I try to make a realistic representation of drug addiction, and there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on in here. But let's see. My very first book ever. I always wanted to be a writer, and I'd written stories all my life, but I never really got down and sat down and really wrote out a book. And I wrote this about, God, when did I first? I rewrote this and redid it for publication about 4 years ago, but I actually wrote it about probably 16, 17 years ago. Gutter Folklore was the name of a friend of mine's band. And I asked him, I said, hey, the band didn't last very long. It fell apart almost before it started. And I said, hey, Do you mind if I use that band name for my book? And he said, sure. My friend John Huey. I'll read you the first part. And this is about San Francisco back in the 80s. Film. Gray streets. Gray sidewalks, gray buildings, gray cars, and gray people with gray skin and gray clothes. No, it wasn't cloudy, not even foggy. In fact, it was a bright and sunny day. But in the center of the concrete jungle known as San Francisco, a mysterious gray film seemed to cover everything. A dull, dingy, medium to light gray sheen that had become translucent to all of the city's denizens. The urban regulars had grown so used to it that they barely noticed it anymore, if they had ever noticed it at all in the first place. Someone from out of town, say from a rural area, might wonder just what was this wraithly gray scum that seemed to cover every square inch of everything and everyone. Was it congealed smog? Was it the all-pervasive afterglow of acid rain? Perhaps it was some sort of subatomic fungus. Out-of-town tourists would check their food to make sure none of the mysterious gray matter had settled onto any of their edibles. It had crossed the mind of many a visiting stranger to ask about the ubiquitous gray substance, but none of the native San Franciscans seemed to notice that it was there. So the tourists kept their mouths shut for fear of causing a controversy or committing some sort of obscure big city discourtesy. The other big city facets were there, the ones that didn't need such close inspection. Any New Yorker or Los Angelesian would recognize them instantly. Hordes of taxis, buses, cars, sidewalks, choked with pedestrians, steam rising from the grates, gutter punks, businessmen, hookers, bike messengers, sidewalk preachers of familiar and unfamiliar face, bars that open at 6 in the morning, fancy and high-priced hotels located next to methadone clinics, extremely obscure ethnic food, bizarre little stores with no apparent aim or target market, and cops. Lots of cops. Cops in cars, cops on the beat, cops on horses, cops on drugs, cops on whores, cops pretending to be whores. As with many urban areas, San Francisco had its share of underground citizens, hardy bohemians that populated the neighborhoods surrounding the skyscraper center, artists, writers, musicians, progressive activists, sexual adventurers, and a horde of decidedly unclassifiable people that made their home in San Francisco, despite the choking presence of corporate institutions and criminally high rents. One of those bohemians was speeding through the rush hour traffic on a partially rusted mountain bike. This is when I realized that Skye was pretty much taking over this book when she was becoming the main character. I rewrote it so that the very first scene is of Skye, a character I would end up writing a lot of books about. I'm currently writing a series about her. There's that book. I've written a lot of books, and I have too many of them. It's around here somewhere. Here it is. I've got a dozen novels on Amazon. This is the one I'm really promoting. The Rise and Fall of Skye Wright. It is definitely not the first book she's ever been in, but it's a series I've been writing. I'm currently working on book number 6. This is the very first book. And there's 5 other books after it. So The Rise and Fall of Skye Wright is the one you should start off with. And I think this is the second best book I've ever written. As far as quality goes, the best book I've ever written is book number 2, The Return of the Dynamite Chicks. So basically, right now there's 5 books in the series. I'm writing book number 6. Books 1 and 2 are one story in 2 books. These books go together. This is one story. I mean, I could have made it like a giant book like my book Crash Shadow, which is huge, which is basically 2 books as well, but I decided to split them up into 2 books. That's the first one. This is the second best book I've ever written. This is the best book I've ever written. As far as quality goes, I'm very proud of this. This is my favorite, probably the best, most well-written book I have of my dozen books up on Amazon right now. The Return of the Dynamite Chicks. Thing is, you have to read this one first. If you don't read this one first, you will not know what the hell's going on in this. So, that one, and then that one. And then there's books that come after it. But like I said, it's a series, and this is one story in 2 books. But like I said, she was in Gutter Folklore. She was in Crash Shadow. And then I wrote, this is the first time I wrote a book. I wrote this book after Crash Shadow. Because I left it with a hanging ending. Well, not really hanging ending. I just decided I needed to work on her again. And so I wrote this book. This book has a hanging ending. A bit of a hanging ending. It's got a conclusion. It's a whole story. But kind of leaves you wondering. So I wrote this book after Crash Shadow. Put it out. The first time I ever had someone else make a cover for me. I hired an artist to do this illustration, and then I hired a graphic designer to design the book. And like I said, I created this cover myself. I don't consider myself an artist or graphic artist. That's my work. This is also done by me. This was not done by me. I used to have my own cover for this, and it was really awful. I had someone do this illustration for The Falling Circle, my book about being poor, how weird it is to be poor. And then I had, the artist's name is Helga Protiv. She lives in Russia, and she's actually done a lot of work for me. Yeah, hang on a sec. So I hired her a long time ago to do this illustration. This is the first time anyone ever did a representation of Sky Wright. And you know, I was like I thought she made it look a little too much like a doll with the big eyes, everything. And you know, I thought the graphic designer's font was kind of suspect. But the fact of the matter is that I really needed someone else to design my book covers. And so I hired a professional artist and then hired a professional graphic designer and let them do their thing. I let them do their thing. If I had designed it, it would look like a gnarly punk flyer for some crazy punk show. And I'm just like, okay, I need to get the professionals to do this. And then this book started selling way better than my other books. It just kind of took off. And it took off because of the cover. People judge books by their covers. They do. That's all there is to it. I mean, I would never do that myself. I've seen really awesome book covers, and I'm like, ooh, I want to buy that book because of the cover, because its cover's so cool. But I mean, like I have some friends who don't have very good book covers, but they have really good books, and they are really good writers. And but like I said, Helga Protiv did this. And then when I started my Sky series, I asked her to do another illustration of Sky. And this was the second time she did one. And she came up with this. And I almost cried when I saw this. When she sent me this, it was beyond what I was hoping for. I was so just overjoyed at this illustration. I was like, whoa. You know when you hire, I don't know if you've ever hired an artist to do something for you, or if you've hired someone to do some sort of craft for you, and you're just like, yeah, to do some sort of craft for you, and you're just like, yeah, and maybe you're like, they do an okay job, or or you're pleased, or you think it's a good job. I mean, this was beyond what I was hoping for. It really was. And in fact, I got a tattoo of it just this year. That's her. I had to do it. And I love this tat. I think it's a great tat. I got my the tattoo artist is in Reno. Her name is Candace Cox. She goes by Candace Corrupt on Instagram. She's awesome. But yeah, I got professionals to do this. The artist, Helga Protiv, second time I hired her. And like I said, she lives in Russia. And I currently owe her a lot of money. But I cannot pay her. I cannot pay her because of the war. Every avenue of sending money to Russia has been cut off. Venmo, PayPal, Western Union, you name it. You cannot send money to Russia. I talked to this woman from Iran who wrote, who also hired an artist to illustrate her book. And she owed the artist a commission and payment for the work. It turns out you cannot send money to Iran either. That's been a fact for a while, since Iran's our country's enemy, the United States enemy. You can't send money to Iran. But she found a workaround. She had an uncle who lived in Turkey, sent the money to the uncle, and apparently you can send money to Iran from Turkey. So, currently I don't have anyone who's got a Russian connection or a way to go around that. And besides, I think it's kind of like frowned upon. It's an individual I want to pay, an artist. She's involved in the anti-war movement over in Russia. I know that for a fact. I also know I have not heard from her in a while. I do know she's still active. She posted to her Instagram. I have not been able to get in touch with her lately. I hope everything's okay with her. She was telling me a lot about the Russian protests. Apparently, people would go out, protest the war. They would get arrested, thrown in jail, and then they would get released because they would arrest a lot more protesters. They're like, okay, now you guys can go. And apparently, this has been going on for a while. Protesters go out, they get arrested, they get tossed in jail, they get tossed out so that they can put in some more arrested protesters. And this is sort of like a revolving door thing. Apparently, it's like, it's kind of like a job now for them. I think they're even starting to get to know each other, like the protesters and the police officers. Like, oh, hey, how's it going? Okay, I got to arrest you. Okay, sure. That kind of thing. But I do know that there's, I have personally found out about the anti-war movement in Russia, and there's a lot of Russians opposed to Putin's war against Ukraine. And I know it all because of this artist. And I just love her work. And I really would like to get in touch with her and work with her some more. Like I said, my Skywrite series, book number 1, The Rise and Fall of Skywrite. I said, after Crash Shadow, the drug book in which Sky is a major character, I wrote this road trip book featuring her. And then I wrote one more book featuring Sky called Stella Maris. Stella Maris is a reference to a song, an Einstürzende Neubauten song. If you don't know who that is, they are one of the original big industrial bands. They're one of my favorite bands. Einstürzende Neubauten. Um, their style has changed quite a bit. Uh, they would go to a city and they would bring just like a bass and a keyboard, and the way they would get the rest of their instruments in whichever town they were in by going to a junkyard and getting like pipes, oil drums, pieces of metal, and just bang and crash away with them. I mean, they have a lot of great songs. Uh, really hardcore industrial songs from their early days. But if you listen, if you look up, I know Einstürzende Neubauten, it's a really long German word. It means falling new buildings. If you look up their song Stella Maris and listen to it, it doesn't sound like an industrial song. It's got violins, it's got a soft bass line, it's got Blixa Bargeld singing with a woman. It's a very nice song. But it's not like a hardcore industrial song like the stuff they used to play. And I like their old stuff. I love their new stuff. It's all really good. And it's very, very rare for a band to go from just being like hardcore industrial, just playing really good music. That's kind of like, it's music you could play at a party or play for your parents or your grandma, and they might think it's a cool song. They sing in German, which I just happen to speak. And ja, ich kann ziemlich gut Deutsch. Wenn man Deutsch kann, man kann kommentieren auf Deutsch. I speak fairly good German. It's a little rusty because I live in Reno. I'm originally from the Bay Area, and there's lots of German speakers in the Bay Area, lots of German natives, lots of people who've learned to speak German. The UC Berkeley has a very large German department, and they hold these weekly meetings where you just go, a Stammtisch, where you can go hang out in a pub and just babble in German with German language students and with actual Germans, actual native German speakers. And so it's called Stella Maris in reference to the Einstürzende Neubauten song. However, there are several novels with the title Stella Maris. Fortunately, book titles are not copyrightable. There's like, I think at least 3 or 4 other books called Stella Maris. I'm not too crazy about the cover. I'm about to change it. It makes it look like it's a book about cycling, because I mentioned there should be a motorcycle on the cover. The artist did that. And the thing is that it's not really a biker novel. A biker gang is involved. She goes up to the North Bay to visit some friends of hers who are in a biker gang. And that's a main part of the story. It's a main hook in the story. But she doesn't ride a motorcycle. She drives a Subaru. A Subaru that she bought off of a friend of hers who was on hard times. But she's very much down with a lot of North Bay biker gangs. Ergo the motorcycle. But this is probably my personal favorite of all the books I've written. This is my personal favorite. I'm from Berkeley, California. That's where I'm originally from. This is a very Berkeley book as far as like culture goes. It takes place in the Bay Area. And I finished writing this in 2001. Sure, and I finished the manuscript for my editor about a week after I moved to Reno. Before I moved to Reno, I lived my entire life in the Bay Area. I've lived here for about 3 years now. But I finished the manuscript for this to send to my editor. Like I said, like a week after I got moved here. And a few hours after I sent this manuscript, to my editor, my stepfather called me up to inform me that my mother had suddenly passed away. My mother is the reason I got into reading and writing. She taught me to read when I was very, very young. I was reading James Thurber by the time I was 5 because of my mother. I was by a country mile the best reader in my first grade class. And I was like astounded that my fellow students in the first grade were having such a hard time reading. I was like, Jack went up the hill. And they would be struggling to read these sentences. And I was like, what? Okay. She instilled me the joy of writing. And she also edited. She would beta read and edit my novels. She beta read and edited my first 4 novels. Or my first 5 novels. She's the only person I know who's read all 5 of my first novels. And this book, I'm almost positive would have been her favorite. Something I plan to do, which I have not done yet, is I want to go to her final resting place and read this to her. It'll take me a couple days, I think. I'd like to videotape it for posterity. It might be a little embarrassing because some of the dialogue is spoken by cats, which means when I read it, I'm going to have to meow. Yep, I'm going to have to meow. Like, yeah, meow out some of the lines. So, there's a pile of cats that figure very prominently in this book. They're major supporting characters. Maybe I'll read the first part. I don't know. Do I feel like meowing on my very first ever TikTok live? Maybe I'll do it next time. But I feel like reading some of the... I am actually going to be reading some of my work at the Washoe County Authors Fest on November 9th in a few weeks, exactly 2 weeks, at the Washoe County Library in downtown Reno. And I mentioned to them, I write about crazy punks doing crazy punk things. They're all in the punk scene. They're either current or recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. They're musicians. So they tend to swear a lot. I mean, just, as a matter of course, they swear a lot. So I'm like, they have the AuthorFest readings. And I'm like, okay, they say it has to be palpable for public audiences, family friendly. And I'm like, okay, if they swear a little bit. I mean, there's nothing crazy in what I'm going to read to them. Nothing really sexual or super gory or violent or anything. They haven't gotten back to me yet. I even said I'd send them the expert first. Now for these 2 books. God, I got too many books. Some people ask me, how is it you write so fast? And it's not that I write fast. I write every day. Every day I do some writing. And that's why I keep piling up these books. Like I said, I got a dozen novels up on Amazon. And I just published a collection of short stories. And the short stories I've written, there's 5 books in this Skywrite series. And there's supporting characters. Her bandmates, her best friend, people like that. And they were starting to become more complex. And I'm like, okay, I got to give these guys their own stories. So I wrote a series of stories starring the supporting characters of these books. Her drummer, her singer, this rising alt music star named Gail, Yeah, you can read about it. But for these two books, I don't have chapter numbers or chapter titles. For these books, I started each chapter with a quote. And the very first chapter in The Rise and Fall of Skywrite, the first book of my Skywrite series, I heard that girl is fast and frightening, dirty hair and a laugh that's mean. Her neighbors call her an evil machine. That is a few lines from L7's song Fast and Frightening. L7 is one of my favorite bands ever. Their song Stuck Here Again is basically the theme song to my life. Yeah, I'm stuck here again. I'm good at making bad situations, my friend. And my favorite line, it starts all over just when it should end. Yeah, I'm stuck here again. Anyways, that is, I heard that girl is fast and frightening, dirty hair and a laugh that's mean. Her neighbors call her an evil machine. That's the perfect way to start off this book. Sky, she's a very attractive woman. She doesn't think so. And one of the reasons she doesn't think so is because a lot of people are intimidated by her. She gets into a lot of fights. She's got a reputation for being a bit of a hothead. She's got resting bitch face from hell. I mean, she looks like someone who might stab you if you say the wrong thing to her. She's got all this crazy black hair. She wears shirts with skulls on it. She's a very intimidating person. And so she doesn't get approached a lot. She doesn't get hit on a lot. And she's not really that aware of her presence. She is a presence, but she doesn't really know that. Not as much as she's not quite well aware. One of the legends about her is she beat up this guy called Sam the Flake at this club called the On Broadway. It was an actual club in San Francisco. It's not there anymore. Lots of crazy stuff happened at the On Broadway. And that cemented her reputation as a brawler. When people found out, first they were happy that she kicked this guy's ass because nobody liked him. But they also realized that she was a real fighter because she beat up someone who was not considered a wimp by any means. Yeah, so she fights. She gets into fights. And she knows how to fight. She's been in a lot of breaking noses is her specialty. In fact, the first scene I ever wrote in Gutter Folklore, she breaks a guy's nose. And I was at the LA Times Book Festival, and I was talking to another writer about this book. And I said to her, oh yeah, this is the book where she gut punches her boyfriend. And the writer said, oh, so your character engages in domestic violence. And I was like, yeah, I guess you could put it that way, sure. And she's like, you shouldn't write about such things. You need to change your vibe. And I'm like, lady, I'm not writing about angels here. I'm writing about crazy punks. They're drunks, they're drug addicts, they're musicians. It's like, yep, she gut punched her boyfriend. Don't let your daughters read this. They might start beating up their boyfriends. Unless you want them to do that. Don't let your mom read it either. She might try to start a garage band. That's part of my pitch. So I start off with that L7 quote. And I'll read the first chapter of this first book of my Skywrite series. Who the fuck is this bitch? And what the fuck is she doing with Glop's guitar? This bitch is filling in for your flaky guitar player, said Sky as she gripped Glop's Les Paul. That way you don't waste everyone's studio time. Sky hit a chord for emphasis. She can't play our songs. How the fuck does she know our songs? Please, power chord chops? She knows our song, says the frazzled-haired drummer as he looked to the angry singer. What the fuck? Where is Glop? Nobody knows, said the skinny bass player whose eyes were practically covered by his red bandana. His girlfriend said something about him ripping out in his Camaro with a bottle of Jack. Sounds promising, don't it? Smiled Sky, who then proceeded to tune Glop's guitar. The frazzled hair was sitting at his drums as the red bandana cradled his bass, both of them looking at the Mohawk singer with pleading eyes. Sky brushed back her wild, dye-black hair and ran her eyes around the studio. Before she got her job at Anemone Studios, she had never played in a truly professional recording studio. She had been to more than a few recording studios, but only warehouse studios and small ad hoc recording sessions in bedrooms and living rooms, run by working-class punks and cash-strapped heavy metal musicians. She had seen some impressive recording setups put together by pasta-eating retail employees and construction workers before, but she had never experienced anything as high-end as the truly soundproof walls, isolation booths, and separate sound engineering rooms shielded by a thick glass wall. All of Sky's friends knew she had gotten a job working for the studio's director, the tall and imposing Tondasil, as her assistant. Tondasil had been her boss before, when she worked at the now long-gone Dry Heave Records, a beloved retail store that had gone under a few years ago. She had convinced her former record store boss to give her a job at the prestigious alt music studio after some well-rehearsed cajoling and general groveling. Sky never told anyone she had recorded at Anemone, since the only playing she had ever done there was when a band's guitarist or bass player failed to show up for a scheduled recording session, which was happening a lot more often than she had anticipated. Fuck, exasperated the singer as he stomped around in a circle, his bright red ducks thudding on the floor. The Mohawk singer took out his cell phone and started furiously texting. Your bandmates have already been trying to get him on the phone for the last few hours, said Sky through an impish grin that she tried unsuccessfully to suppress. Unless he shows up in the next few minutes, it's either me or eat the studio time you paid for. Sky scratched out a quick power chord and then slid her hand down the strings as she wavered on her feet and leaned towards an amplifier, threatening to hit the three-quarters of a band with feedback. The singer gazed at his phone in vain as he anxiously waited for an answer to his multiple texts. Fuck! We haven't got all day if you want to get started, announced a booming voice over the intercom. Sky pointed to the control booth. You're paying him right now, whether you play or not. The singer gripped his phone and gritted his teeth. Fucking glop, he said as he shook, literally trembling with rage. His head snapped around when Sky put a hand on his shoulder. I'll fill in until he gets here, if he gets here. In the meantime, what the fuck have you got to lose? The singer waved his hands around as Sky kept her hand on his shoulder. How the fuck are you gonna play your songs? How the fuck are you gonna learn all this shit on the fly? Sky took her hand back and plucked out a progression, followed by a quick choppy riff, followed by another progression, finishing a guitar spiel with a trio of quickly raked out power chords. The singer looked her right in the eye. What the fuck? Are you like one of our fans? I've seen you guys play 3 times, says Guy. I also listened to your scratchy-ass demo a bunch of times before I came to work. The singer's face relaxed. What? Because we were coming in to record? Because you wouldn't be the first band to have a member flake out. Glop was probably passed out in an alley, said the red bandana. The singer's face softened. Can you really play our songs? No problem, said Sky with a wave of her hand. The Mohawk narrowed his eyes at her. Did anyone ever tell you look like a long-haired Joan Jett on heroin? I'm going to take that as a compliment, replied Sky with a perky smile on her face. A voice boomed over the intercom. Let's go, people. The clock is ticking. The Mohawk walked up to the mic and took it off its stand. He nodded to the sound engineer. Then there's a little break. You fucking bitch, he snarled as he turned and walked out of the studio. What the fuck? Puzzled Sky out loud as the Mohawk singer disappeared. You're better than Glop, said the red bandana. We don't sound that good when he plays. And he's pissed off about that? Fuck yeah, said the drummer as he gathered up his drumsticks. He has a loyalty thing. Sure, I get it. Also, you're a girl, said the red bandana. That pisses him off, that a girl plays like that. Now that's just stupid. He could be really stupid. So why do you put up with him? Shit, this band wouldn't exist without him, said the frizzy-haired drummer as he walked out from behind his drum kit. We would make it to practice as often and we wouldn't work on the songs as much. He's kind of like a punk drill sergeant. I mean, if we didn't have him, we'd be fucking around a lot more. Sky shook her head. I would hate to be Glop when he finally catches up to him. You have no idea, said the red bandana. Hey, you want to go grab a beer with us after we break down? Asked the frizzy hair. Nah, I gotta get home and feed my cats. Coming out of the studio, Sky's tall and slim boss Tondasil was waiting for her in the hallway as she effortlessly balanced her impressive headdress of braided hair and dreadlocks. I thought that singer was going to punch you, said Tondasil. I don't know why you just stood there. I hit back, said Sky. That's all we need is a brawl in the studio. Sky held up her hands. I don't punch first. Tondasil slowly gave Sky a look. Try not to get people too worked up in the studio, she announced. Yes, boss. Sky went to the office to look over her schedule. She took note of the next day's studio's times and quickly searched her calendar for calls that she needed to make. She reminded herself to keep putting her personal tasks in her work calendar so that she could keep her schedule straight. She had to take her cat Danny Boy to the vet for a checkup later that week. Then she had her Saturday German class in Point Richmond with her tutor and teacher Toby, a member of her punk tribe who just happened to be a dead fluent German speaker. She also went as far as marking down a dinner at her old friend Laurie's house so she could finally meet Laurie's elusive girlfriend Gabby, the registered nurse and Laurie's official sugar mama, who Sky had still not managed to meet. Sky turned around and strained her neck to look around the office. She saw Tondasil talking to a tall, slender, and well-dressed man with a buzz cut, someone Sky did not recognize. No doubt he was some sound engineer or manager for one of the bigger bands coming by for a recording session. Sky thought he looked like a skinhead wearing business casual. She turned to her company laptop. She decided not to put down her Narcotics Anonymous meetings in her work calendar. She had no doubt that Tondasil would give her grief about doing so if she had put down her planned 12-step meetings in an official company document. Recovering drunks and burnouts were par for the course in the music industry, but Sky was trying to remain professional. Tondasil walked up to Sky as the business casual skinhead had left. Who's on for tomorrow? Sky narrowed her eyes at the calendar. Let's see. Grumpus, Amicus, and the Flat Lorraines. Okay. Hey, keep March 17th clear. I'm going to need you for that entire day. Gotcha, said Sky with a thumbs up. You gonna cut your hair again? Sky shook her head around and brushed her hair back. I don't know. I might let it grow out and do dreads again. I haven't done that in a while. Okay. I'm just trying to emulate you, said Sky as she pointed at Tondasil's long, gravity-defying locks that were held together by numerous and chaotically placed hairbands. Good to know, replied Tondasil demurely. Tondasil picked up a clipboard and walked out. Sky knew what Tondasil had meant when she asked her to keep that specific day clear. Someone big was coming by on the 17th. So that's the first chapter. That's the opening to the rise and fall of Skywrite, the first book in my Skywrite series. Sometimes I get a little self-conscious reading. Sometimes when I read something, I have the urge to rewrite it again. Not this chapter, though. I like the way this chapter works. And the second chapter is about her at her house. And the quote that leads up that chapter, I lead every chapter with quotes. It's from a book called Shiloh and Other Stories by Bobby Ann Mason. One day I was counting the cats, and I absent-mindedly counted myself. In the book, Sky has a lot of cats. 5 to be exact. She inherited the cats from her previous neighbor, who passed away. And Sky was the one who found her neighbor. She lives on top of a store, and there's 2 apartments that are connected by a landing. You got to go around to the back of the store, walk up these stairs, and she lives in this little apartment. And next door to her was an old Berkeley girl with a bunch of cats. And that's from my book Stella Maris, the book that comes before this one. And she's the one who discovered her neighbor had passed away. She found this out because her cats let her know. The cats came up to her and meowed at her with worried looks on their faces, and she knew something was wrong. And before she called the authorities to let her know that she had found her neighbor, she herded all of the neighbor's cats, all of her friends' cats, into her apartment. Because her neighbor, I call her Jolene. Yes, that's her name. That's from the book Stella Maris. She promised Jolene that if anything ever happened to her, she would take care of her cats. So before she called the police to say she had found her neighbor and her neighbor had passed on, she made sure that she collected every single cat, including the little white cat that doesn't like anybody, and herded them all into her apartment. And the cats are a big deal in Stella Maris, and they're a very big deal in this book too. So, if you're a writer, I'd like to know if you have any pets that play significant parts in any of your books. These cats, Jolene's cats, play a big part in the book Stella Maris and in the Rise and Fall of Skywrite. And later on, my character Preston, in the book A Long Slow Aftermath, there is also a very significant character, a red-nosed pit bull named Joey. And Joey is a big part of this book. So A Long Slow Aftermath, I'm very proud of this book. I really like this book. However, it is the densest book I've ever written. This is a book, like I said, I call this the I read too much Russian literature when I was a teenager book. It's about my character Preston dealing with life after drug rehab. He was a speed freak. He was a meth dealer. He did all kinds of drugs and alcohol, and this is about him adjusting to life afterwards. And one of my favorite characters in here is a character named Toshi. After he gets out of rehab, he stays in a little studio apartment in the back of a friend of his. He has a friend who's become quite successful as a graphic artist for a very large corporation. And it's a character named Thea, who is from my book, The Falling Circle, which was my other Preston book. And in that book, she lives in a warehouse, work warehouse, and she wears secondhand clothes. And in this one, she's got a nice house with a studio in the back, and she lets him stay in the studio after he gets out of rehab. And he makes friends with Thea's girlfriend, Toshi. In fact, the book opens with Preston and Toshi going to get a cup of coffee. Thea's gone on business trips all the time, so Toshi hangs out with Preston. Now, one of the reasons I'm very proud of Toshi, I really like that character Toshi. She's Asian, she's gay, and she's blind. In fact, I interviewed a blind person for this character. I told them I wanted to have a blind character in my book. And so I said, well, what should I do with this character? Like, I asked her about the experiences of being blind. She gave me lots of tips. Like, make sure she makes jokes about being blind. Because that's, she said that's what we're going to do. I researched a lot about that. Because I want this character to be authentic. Now, when you have a character when most people have characters like that, Asian, gay, blind, it's because they're Asian, or they're gay, or they're blind. That's the hook for the character. But that's not what Toshi is doing in this book. Toshi is from the right side of the tracks. Preston is not. Preston is from the wrong side of the tracks. He's been poor and working class his whole life. He has had to work his ass off for almost nothing. That's in the book The Falling Circle, where he's a member of the working poor. And he has to live in a house with way too many roommates, and it's way too chaotic. And Toshi, however, she's from Montclair, the fancy neighborhood in Oakland. She's a trust fund baby. But she's also from the Bay Area. And she forms a real bond with Preston. And she's really curious about a lot of things. Preston is really into the punk scene. He's a musician. He goes to punk shows all the time. And one of my favorite scenes in this book is he takes Toshi to her very first punk show. And even though she is a trust fund baby who's from a fairly wealthy family, she's the kind of person who's never going to have to worry about, where her next pay, she doesn't live paycheck to paycheck. She's pretty much set for life. But even so, she's curious about other cultures, about other classes, about all kinds of things. She keeps an open mind. She's not closed off. She doesn't have to be hanging around, the upper middle class and the elites. She doesn't mind hanging out with the hoi polloi. And she talks to Preston about all kinds of things. He tells her about his drug dealing days. He talks to her about the places he used to live. And she gets very curious about the punk scene. And Preston takes her to a punk show at Gilman. Uh-oh. Let's see. What's going on? TikTok's going to kick me off in 4 minutes and 48 seconds, it says. In any case, I'll just real quick. He takes Toshi. She's never been to a punk show. She's very curious about it. He takes her to a punk show. And this scene was inspired by a scene in my friend Danny's book, PR. Danny Dassler wrote a wonderful book called PR. And it's an excellent book. There's a great scene in it where she takes the main character takes a bunch of civilians to a punk show. And that scene inspired the scene in my book, A Long Slow Aftermath. And I really like it. I think it's one of my favorite scenes I've ever written. And in any case, this was my first ever TikTok live. I hope you found it informative, entertaining. In any case, if you want to know about my reading, this is the book I'm pushing, The Rise and Fall of Skywrite by me, Jeffrey Matica. Yes, let's see. That's my crazy, whoops. I don't even know my own book anymore. That's my crazy ass last name. I'm very easy to find. My first name, Jeffrey, very generic American name. Matucha. There's only 2 people in the Western United States that have that surname, and that's me and my brother, as far as I know. There's some people in the Midwest that have that one, but that's where my father's from. But yeah, Matucha. It looks like Matucha. It's pronounced Matica. Very easy to find. The Rise and Fall of Skywrite. This is the book. This is the book. I'm trying to get it to go viral. Please buy it. Anyways, especially if you've been in the punk scene, you'll like it because it'll remind you of the old days. If you've never been in the punk scene, you want to know what it's like to be a crazy punk, check it out. Anyways, yeah, this is my first TikTok live. Thanks for